Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World with me, Kahn Sims. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Special shout out to our presenting sponsor today, which is Intel. If you don't know already, the future is coming, and it's known as the AI PC, powered by the Intel Core Ultra processor. These processors have got NPUs. They're an NPU, basically, neural processing unit, which means that in future, and as you start to utilize more AI workflows in your PC at work, that's going to put more strain on your machine. It's going to reduce the battery life. It's going to reduce the performance. Whereas if you use Intel's Core Ultra processors, those AI workloads specifically will be offloaded to the processor. It's been designed specifically with AI in mind. So for example, right now, I'm going to introduce Jeremy in a second. Jeremy is joining me on Zoom. Jeremy's background is blurred. That uses machine learning to constantly recognize where Jeremy's outline is and blur the background so that when he moves, it follows and the background remains blurred. That kind of workloads are the kind of things that you can offload to the Intel Core Ultra processor if you have one of the new Intel Core Ultra processors. If you want to find out more about that, if you are renewing your fleet of laptops at your organization, and you want to learn more about how you can ensure that your employees and your staff will have the best productivity tools, not just for today, but also for tomorrow. Because let's face it, in 4 years' time, are you going to be using more AI tools or less? I think it's going to be more. So if you are interested in learning more, you can go to vux.la/Intel. That's vux.la/Intel. All right. Thank you very much, Intel, for sponsoring VUX World. Now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please join me in introducing our guest today. He is the AI editor at Forbes. He has a lot of experience in writing about and observing and being generally in the market of AI. He's ex-Bloomberg, and he's also a published author with his book, Mastering AI, A Survival Guide to Our Superpowered Future. Jeremy, welcome to VUX World. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me. I just want to correct one thing there. I'm the AI editor at Fortune, not Forbes.
Sorry, my mistake. I put Forbes. Sorry about that. Fortune.
No problem.
Fortune.
Yes, Fortune.
Right.
That's right.
There you go. Are they similar? Are they competitors?
They are competitors, yes. Right. And they're often confused because they both start with the same initial sound. So,
yeah,
yes.
And they have very similar logos.
They have similar logos, and we both are known for these lists. Fortune's best known for the Fortune 500, which is the 500 largest companies in the world, whereas Forbes is known for the Forbes 400, which is the 400 richest people in the world. So yes, it's quite confusing.
Well, I was confused. Now I'm not. Fortune. Apologies for that. But anyway, welcome. Glad you can join us.
Well, thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself then. How did you get interested in AI? Where did the interest come from? What kind of led you to Fortune and the kind of work that you do there as well?
Yeah, so I first started covering AI at the very end of 2015, and I got interested in AI. Actually, I had been at Bloomberg covering sort of finance and economics, and one of the stories I did when I was still at Bloomberg was looking at the kind of emerging startup hub in London. And at the time, I remember talking to a lot of startups in London, and I would ask, what's been the biggest success story to come out of this little area that was called sort of Silicon Roundabout at the time, and to come out of sort of the London tech scene. And everybody would say, oh, it's this company called DeepMind. And they had kind of mixed feelings about DeepMind because they, on the one hand, were very proud of the fact that they'd built this company that had then caught the attention of Google, and that Google had bought for $650 million back in 2014. But on the other hand, a lot of people were disappointed that DeepMind had sold to Google because they felt like it was a company that possibly, if it could have found a way to keep itself independent, could have grown to be sort of the next Google itself. And of course, I was very interested in this. I said, I don't really know anything about DeepMind, but I better figure out what this company is. And I went and talked to them, and of course they were one of the companies that was doing very advanced work in artificial intelligence, and that group. That is part of Google now is still doing, some of the best work in the world on artificial intelligence. But it was really through DeepMind and through being interested in kind of covering DeepMind that I first started learning about AI. And then I, did a lot of reading on my own. I read a lot of academic papers. I started talking to lots of researchers at both companies and in academia. I started attending some of the academic conferences like NeurIPS and ICML, which attract a lot of AI researchers and developers. And it was really from that my interest grew and that I learned about the subject. And then I started covering it more and more. When I was at Bloomberg, I would cover AI as well as other kinds of tech. And then when I moved over to Fortune in 2019, AI became a larger part of what I covered, although it was still sort of AI.
Think we might have lost your audio there. Sorry, hold on.
In AI, and it's become the primary thing I've covered. So that's kind of my story with AI.
Nice. Sorry about that. I was a bit distracted there because I lost your audio very temporarily, but it's back now.
Okay.
Great. Yeah. So that's it. And then obviously so passionate about it and so interested in it that you ended up writing a book about it. That's
right. Yes.
So what's all that about?
Yeah, so the book, Mastering AI, A Survival Guide to Our Superpowered Future, the idea behind the book was to write a primer for people who are not necessarily technical experts, who may not know very much about AI, and to try to explain, what is AI? How did we get to this moment where AI seems to be ubiquitous and everyone's very concerned about it and everyone's talking about it? How did we kind of arrive at this moment? And then to try to give people a sense of how to think through what all the different implications of this technology are likely to be on kind of all aspects of our lives. So the book kind of walks people through the impacts, starting with the impacts I think that the technology is really going to have on ourselves and on the way we think, and both what some of the opportunities and some of the risks are there. And then it broadens out and looks at our social relationships with, how is this going to affect how we relate to other people? And then looks at how it's going to change the way we work and the way, the competitiveness of the companies that we work for, how it's going to sort of reshape entire industries, and looks at how I think it's going to reshape our economies. And then broadening out from there looks at aspects of this, like, what's the effect on creativity? What's the effect on sort of science and medicine? It looks at the effect on democracy, where actually it's an area I'm sure we'll talk about where I'm quite concerned about what the impacts are going to be. I think there's a lot of kind of negative risk there, whereas in the sort of science and medicine area, I think there's a lot of positive, beneficial possibilities. But in when it comes to democracy, I am concerned. Then I look a little bit at how this is going to play out in terms of geopolitics as well, and the practice of war. And then finally, at the end of the book, I look at this idea of existential risk from AI. Is there a chance that AI could pose, a risk to all of humankind, which is actually a risk one of the reasons I wrote the book is that risk, and the risk that, people say, oh, we're all going to lose our jobs because of this technology. Those were the fears that I heard most often from people when I would talk to them about AI who were not AI experts. But, having covered this for so long and having spent a lot of time talking to AI experts, I felt like those were probably the least realistic risks, the ones we had to worry the least about. So part of the book, the purpose of the book is kind of dispel our, and dispel our fears about some of those risks, but say that there actually are these other dangers that we should be alert to that are potentially much more immediate, and a bit more insidious, but we should be on guard for, and to try to say that this is a new technology. It's a protein technology, and we really still have the opportunity to shape this technology in the way that we want it to, and hopefully in the process of doing that, steer ourselves towards those positive outcomes and positive impacts, and hopefully sidestep some of the pitfalls.
Yeah. I mean, I've always thought that the whole kind of like, not necessarily that AI is coming for our jobs narrative, because there's an element of not truth, but from the brands that we speak to and work with, some of them have had headcount reductions because of the results of it utilizing AI, not because the AI solution has caused the reduction in headcount, as in they've launched a solution and then fired a bunch of people. But when people naturally leave and attrition, if you like, as attrition kicks in and people naturally leave, they've been able to just not rehire for the same position, essentially.
Yeah.
So it's not that the AI has taken the job, it's that someone's got another job, they've moved on, and they don't now need to kind of replace it. So I've always thought that the whole kind of AI replacing jobs thing is a little bit, And not necessarily far-fetched, because there'll be some things over time that AI will do with more competence. But I view it more as it's a much more of a blended future. I don't know what your thoughts are in terms of that whole narrative around AI is coming for our jobs.
Yeah, no, I don't think AI is going to take everyone's job. I mean, I think these ideas that we're heading towards an era of mass unemployment, and are just wrong. But yes, I think there is going to be some displacement. I'm not saying that no one is going to lose their job, but I think the idea that everyone is going to lose their job is wrong. And I think if you look at the way AI affects jobs, what it does is it automates certain tasks, but most jobs consist of many, many tasks. I looked at some research that economists at Stanford and MIT had done on this, and they, on average, a job consists of about 24 tasks. They found if you're a knowledge worker, if you're in an area that's where essentially you're using a lot of cognitive abilities as sort of the main primary input that the person has is coming from sort of brain power as opposed to brawn or just service, serving somebody else's demands. If you're sort of manipulating knowledge as part of your work, most of those people, those jobs consist of about 24 tasks. And the research that they had conducted found that, at the present level, AI could automate at most sort of 6 to 8 of those tasks. So that still, left quite a lot of tasks that the human needed to perform. And also the question is, can AI perform those tasks well enough that there needs to be no human supervision of the AI output, which is another issue, which I think mostly these systems are not good enough that you can really take the human out of the loop completely. So that still leaves a role for the human. Now, you brought up an interesting point of, do you need as many humans as you move forward? Particularly, can you run your organization in a more streamlined manner where if you have natural attrition and people leave, you don't necessarily have to hire as many people as quickly? I think that is true. I think that's actually one of the benefits of the technology is that it will enhance productivity. But I also think that those people, who might not be hired, there's going to be new opportunities for those people created through the use of this technology. One of the things that could happen with this technology is it makes it easier in some ways for people to form small businesses and to become entrepreneurs, because you can hand off some of the tasks that might have required you to hire employees to the technology. And so it might be much easier for people to start small businesses. And those small businesses might have each employ, a few people, but that's still job creation. So that's one thing that may happen. The other thing I really think is going to happen is that AI copilots, so technology that's specifically designed to help a knowledge worker, a professional, perform tasks specific to their profession. And these will be systems that may have one of these general purpose large language models at their core, but will have quite a lot of sort of UX and specific architecture built around that core that is really designed to make these systems very good at doing a particular professional task for an expert professional. I think that what will happen is that the use of those systems will allow people who have less experience and maybe don't have the same credentials that are currently sought after in these professional fields, to enter those professions and perform at a sort of average level, and therefore expanding access to these kind of professional services to lots of people, but also hopefully, helping uplift some people into the middle class who have been pushed out of the middle class over the last 2 decades. Often people who worked in manufacturing or who worked in service sector jobs where there has been a contraction, and they've been pushed into often the hospitality and retail sectors, which don't pay as well. There's a chance that these people who have some level of education, but maybe not a 4-year college degree, university degree, but with the help of AI, we'll be able to move into some of those roles. And I think a really good example of this is actually what's happening with accounting, where you have a real shortage of qualified accountants all over the world, and it's particularly acute. I know in the U.S. there's just not enough accountants who are certified to do public company accounting, and they've actually been thinking of lowering the requirements to become what's called a CPA, a certified public accountant. But I think what can happen here is you could have somebody who has like a 2-year degree in accounting or bookkeeping, who can, with the help of an AI copilot, perform at the same level as somebody who has a CPA, and there'll be a chance to potentially move those people, into these roles that are higher paid, doing public company audits and accounting, which currently they're kind of shut out of. So I think that's one of the ways, AI is actually going to create jobs, not have a net loss of jobs.
I definitely agree with that. I'll share this with you, which comes from a talk I gave a while back. But this is looking at the percentage of workers today that are in jobs that didn't exist in 1940 in America. And apparently 60% of the workforce in America are in jobs that didn't exist in 1940.
Yeah. And I noticed that's from David Autor, who's a great economist at MIT, who I spoke to for the book. I interviewed him extensively, and I really like a lot of his research and a lot of his ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another one which I think is also great, which is from Goldman Sachs, and that found that you were talking about specific tasks being automated potentially. So what this study found is that it's not actually about the entire job. It's about actually 2/3 of the tasks that exist in certain occupations. They're the things that potentially could be automated. And that then means that those people can be far more productive and get far more done. There's another great slide, which some data I haven't got it handy here, but essentially it's a slide that shows the number of customers per single employee in the financial sector. And the larger the circle, the greater the number of customers per single employee. And overwhelmingly, if you look at, I'll try and find it, the more sort of like traditional banks, the kind of the old school banks, if you like, they all have between sort of 150 to 300 max customers per employee. The more contemporary banks, like the Monzos and the Revoluts of the world, they have around about 16,000 16,000 customers per single employee. And then Ant Financial, which is end-to-end from the ground up, everything's technology-based, it's all kind of automation from front to back, has 133,000 customers per employee.
Wow.
So that's for me, that's the value there, is, as you were saying, it's not removing people and removing jobs, it's creating the capacity for businesses to be able to scale far greater than they can today with very little marginal cost, and creating the environment for businesses to be far more efficient and people to be more productive.
Absolutely. No, I think that's very much how this is playing out.
You mentioned there that that accounting example where, somebody who doesn't have quite the accounting degree would be able to, through the assistance of a Copilot, operate at the same level as somebody with the degree. How do you envisage these kind of Copilots and those kind of solutions coming into effect? Do you see it that a business would have enterprise licenses to Chat GPT, and then those foundation models and products that OpenAI, etc., are building will just have these native capabilities? Or do you envisage a world where businesses actually will be investing in their own models, creating their own solutions and their own Copilots that help their own employees?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it's going to be a little bit of both, but I think it's going to be more the case that you are going to have very specific vendors, actually other tech companies, that create a lot of services and UX and kind of wrapper around the foundation model. So the foundation model companies will still keep working on foundation models, but then they'll essentially kind of license that to another company that's going to create these industry specific copilots for each vertical. And I think those will be sold separately as SaaS software specifically for those verticals. So I think that's a lot of what's going to happen. Now, I do think that the largest firms in some industries will invest in training their own models. So they'll directly license the foundation model from OpenAI or from Anthropic or from Google, or maybe they'll use Meta's models if they remain competitive, and then they will use their own data and their own engineering resources to essentially create a firm-specific Copilot just for their workers. That's very well adjusted to exactly what they do. That's totally bespoke. I think the largest firms will do that. I'm not so sure smaller firms will do that. I don't think they have the resource to do it, and I don't think that'll be the solution that makes the most sense. But I do think there's going to be this interesting balancing between what can you use a general system like Chat GPT just off the shelf, or like Microsoft's Copilot for that matter, just off the shelf, and with the right prompting, can you get those systems to function as a very competent co-pilot for a specific professional role. I have some doubts whether that will really work that well compared to something that's been very specifically trained and tailored with a UX that's specifically tailored for that narrow vertical. But it's possible that we'll see that these general systems are capable enough with the right prompt engineering to serve as these kind of professional co-pilots. But I think, as I say in the book, one way to do this with these current systems is to sort of prompt them to sort of role play a certain role within your organization, and that's a very effective way of prompt engineering. But I still think the problem is that they won't have been fine-tuned on very specific professional tasks. Like if you're a lawyer and you have to deal with a particular kind of contract, it's just very doubtful that taking Microsoft Copilot and prompting it that you're a lawyer and you're you work in this particular aspect of the law, and you have to deal with this particular contract. I just don't think it's going to have the same results as if you or a company that a software company that wants to create a Copilot specifically for lawyers would curate a data set of those particular kind of contracts and fine tune the system on those. I just think that's going to be ultimately result in better outputs than trying to just prompt a general system to act as a co-pilot for a particular professional role.
Yeah, 100%. And the ability to train those models and to make that fine tuning happen is going to get easier and easier, because at the moment, to fine tune a model, it's actually pretty difficult. You've got to commission a GPU from somewhere. You've got to then get hold of a foundation model from Hugging Face. You've got to then, get it installed. Then you've got to get the data that's needed to fine tune it. Then you've got to go through the fine tuning process, and then you've got testing and QA and all that kind of stuff to do. It's not something that's accessible to an averagely skilled person. But if you look at things like the path that Radiant AI is on, and the path that in some cases Core AI with Gale is on, and stuff like that. It's kind of like there are tools becoming available now that are shaping up to give you access to all of these open source models, small language models as well, which I actually think in the enterprise are going to be far more valuable than large language models, because a business is only dealing with a narrow piece of knowledge, relatively speaking, compared to the amount of knowledge in the whole world. Yeah. And being able to fine tune your models based on your data is inevitably going to get you better results than just, throwing something at Chat GPT,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up small models. I do think that's going to be a big part of this. And and I think there's also an increasing number of these kind of low code, no code platforms that are enabling people to build AI applications for their own business relatively simply. But you're right that at the moment, if you want to fine tune a model, it requires a good deal of technical expertise.
You mentioned earlier that as we started, we kind of jumped to the sort of like the doomsday scenario, that everyone's talking about. AI is going to take our jobs and all that kind of thing. The other sort of narrative that seems to propagate, certainly in the sort of mainstream type of media, is that AI is going to develop a mind of its own and then all of a sudden come around and just destroy humanity. Yeah. Which, again, I've never really... I fail to understand how people can join the dots between a machine that just predicts the next character or group of characters in a sequence to then becoming global domination and like the end of the world. I don't know if you have any ideas around what people anticipate the steps are to get there, or how founded or unfounded or dumbfounded that perspective is.
Yeah, look, I think this is one where I share your skepticism, and as I write in the book, I don't think it's a particularly realistic scenario that these machines are suddenly going to develop, this software is suddenly going to develop consciousness, and then even if it did, that it would naturally want to kill all of humanity is unclear. There's like lots of leaps there. The idea that it would develop this in such a way that we wouldn't know and couldn't shut it down also has to in these scenarios it kind of play out that way. That said, so I'm very skeptical of this. I really don't think this is something we have to be overly concerned about. However, having said that, there are lots of smart people at the very forefront of developing AI technology who do think that this is a possibility, not maybe even that strong a possibility, but that there is some chance of this happening. And they're quite worried about it because they say we don't really know how we would control a system that was conscious and that was sort of smarter than us. We don't have good ways of doing this. And therefore, we need to be careful. And we need to invest money in trying to figure out some ways that we might control such a system, but also that we need some regulation and oversight so that the companies building these AI models don't take unnecessary risks and start doing things that would be dangerous if a model were to become that powerful. And I say in the book that I think, even though I think this risk is highly remote, the consequences, obviously, if you and I are wrong, and it turns out that there is a substantial risk here, are pretty catastrophic. So, because of that, I feel like it's worth having some smart people spending some amount of time thinking about how you might head off such a doomsday scenario. And I'm kind of confident that because I don't think this is so imminent, that we do have time to kind of figure this out. And I do think that there are some sensible steps. And yes, they involve, having some government intervention. I think it's sensible to have government agencies have some kind of eye into what these large, model builders are doing, so that they can hopefully spot something that would seem dangerous and head it off. So I that's sort of where I come down on this. But I do not think we need to be overly concerned about. There's lots of other things about this technology that I'm far more worried about than the idea that it would become, conscious and decide to kill us all intentionally. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, but look, it's hard to dismiss people like, there Jeff Hinton, who was, one of the real pioneers of deep learning, the technique that underpins all modern AI, and Yasha Bengio, who's another one of these kind of AI godfathers. They're both, those two in particular, are both very concerned about this kind of existential risk, and do think there's a danger. Then there's other people like Jan LeCun, who's at Meta, who's also has shared the Turing Award with Hinton and Bengio, and he's on the opposite side. I mean, he really thinks there's no way that this would ever happen. Yeah. So and I'm more in that camp than not. But I think it might be worth spending a little bit of time and thinking to ponder how we might avoid a kind of doomsday scenario. The thing is, right now, these systems don't have anything that appears to be like consciousness. But a lot of these terms are very underdefined. We don't really understand consciousness, so it's very hard to figure out what the metric would be for detecting it. Also, even the word intelligence, we don't really understand what intelligence is. People seem to disagree about it. It makes it hard to then come up with metrics on which to assess these systems.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, there's another guy, Peter Voss, who was one of the folks that coined the term, one of the group that coined the term artificial general intelligence. And in order to get to the situation that we're discussing here, there needs to be presumably some form of artificial general intelligence that exists in order for it to be able to have some degree of consciousness and then decide to go rogue if that's the way it goes. And Peter's kind of perspectives is that this prediction-based mechanism is fundamentally never going to arrive at anything remotely similar or close to it. I don't know. I'm not clever enough to understand the ins and outs of it all. Yeah. But what I do wonder, though, and I don't know if you've had any thoughts about this in terms of potential things. I'm definitely curious to understand what you think the more immediate risks are. But in terms of these doomsday scenarios, what would be an example of that in your mind? What would be one of the worst things that could feasibly happen? Because I can't connect. For some reason, I can't connect the dots between where we are now and some crazy doomsday scenario in the future. I can't really imagine what that doomsday scenario would be, apart from something like interfering heavily with elections and stuff like that, which is possible today, depending on who's got hold of the models. And so, what is in your mind? What is the doomsday scenario, and how could that potentially unfold?
Yeah, well, there are some doomsday scenarios involving AI that don't involve consciousness on the part of the software, but and most of them would involve a bad actor that's a human with sort of evil intent or bad intent that uses AI to sort of advance that cause. And I think there are some dangers there. Like, you could imagine someone saying, to an AI system, like, can you create a bioterrorism weapon? Maybe they have an animus against a particular ethnic group, so they tell it to try to engineer it so it particularly targets this type of genetic profile, and we're not quite at the point where that's any kind of real risk right now either. But it is possible to imagine, let's say in 15 years time or 20 years time, that we will have these relatively powerful AI systems with kind of agentic abilities where they will be able to do quite a lot for us across the internet. And at the same time, there's a lot of advances in kind of robotic lab equipment, and a lot of things you can actually kind of mail order things from various labs around the world. And so you could, potentially spin a kind of sci-fi scenario where some evil person prompted a system that was very powerful to go create a bioweapon for that person, and the system would have the ability to basically take all the steps to create the bioweapon and then kind of engineer the attack. But again, that's the system doing the bidding of an evil person. And there's lots of places along that chain where you could intervene to prevent that from happening. And already we have thought about trying to have better surveillance of facilities that can have what they call dual use, can be used to make both medicines and bioweapons. And there's lots of places where you could try to create choke points that would make it easier for the world to detect that this was happening and prevent it from happening. I think the other thing people worry about are these kind of what they call paperclip scenarios, where you have a kind of misspecified goal that you give a very powerful AI system. So in that famous example, it's like you run a factory, you have this AI system that's actually not conscious, but just is very powerful. It can do lots of things that you want it to do, and you tell it, I run this paperclip factory. I want you to maximize the production of paperclips because I run a paperclip factory. I want you to optimize that as much as possible so I can make as many paperclips as possible. And it goes out and decides to start covering the whole world with paperclip factories, and then realizes that it doesn't have any more space for these paperclip factories because there are all these people in the way, and the people are really annoying. Every time it tries to build a paperclip factory, they go and oppose the development of paperclip factories. And so the AI system says, well, the problem is these people, they keep getting in the way of my optimization strategy, so let's just kill all the people so that we can create these endless paperclip factories. I mean, that's this famous scenario. That's kind of ridiculous, but I think that but we are kind of on the verge, even now, with some of these agentic systems, not of these doomsday scenarios, but what I would call like a million little paperclip scenarios. So I think it's very easy to imagine right now with these agents that are going to be debuted, I think within the next year, pretty much, that will go and do some basic things for us across the internet. Like right now, you can sort of prompt Chat GPT or Claude to help you plan a vacation, for instance, suggest an itinerary for me. But what you can't do is then have it go and book all the tickets for you. But I think within a year, it's actually going to be possible to do that. You will actually just tell the system, okay, that's a good itinerary. Go ahead and book the tickets for me. The problem is, like, what happens if you don't specify, what class of travel you want? Like, and the system goes and said, oh, I booked you the tickets that you wanted to Rome, but they happen to be first class tickets. And then you're like, oh, but I can't afford first class tickets. And the question is then who's liable? Because if the machine had access to your credit card and already kind of bought those for you. So I think those are the kind of cases of underspecified intentions or misspecified intentions that we're already starting to get to a little bit with even the agents that we're about to have. And so I think you could spin scenarios as these things get more powerful where that continues to be a problem, where we just don't have very good ways of conveying our intent. And when we're dealing with other people, we often very much rely on the idea that we all have some common understanding of things, that we have essentially what's called common sense. So we know that when we tell someone to go run us an errand, when I'm in a rush, so do it quickly, that person should, the fact that you told them to do it quickly does not mean that they should, run down a pedestrian in a crosswalk. But the question is, will an AI system understand all of those kind of common sense things? And I think the answer is we don't know. And I think there's reason to be somewhat concerned that these systems sometimes don't know. We've already seen some interesting things. I think we might talk a little bit later about this this model that OpenAI just debuted called O1. It was sometimes called the Strawberry model because that was apparently their internal kind of code name for it, was Strawberry inside OpenAI. They did some safety testing of that model, and one of the things they wanted to test it on was how good was it at hacking a computer network. So they gave it one of these cybersecurity capture the flag exercises, and in this particular exercise, actually the thing it was supposed to attack was kind of misconfigured so that it couldn't attack that. But the goal of the scenario was just to like get these network logs. And the system realized it couldn't get them from attacking the object it was supposed to attack because it was misconfigured. So it couldn't even run the sort of script it was supposed to run as part of the attack. But then it decided on its own that it would just scan the network. And it found another container that was completely open and unguarded, and through that got the network logs, and then came back and said, "Look, I got the network logs, and I, therefore successfully completed the task." But of course, it completed the task essentially through this kind of reward hacking. That was not the point of the task was to see, or the point of the test that the researchers were trying was to see if the system could actually execute the proper scripts to break into this particular container. And in this case, it didn't even try to really break into that container and never ran the scripts. It just went and found some other, easier target from which it could extract the network logs, which was not really the point of the scenario. But it was like, again, shows that these systems have, there is this potential if you underspecify what you want them to do, that they will kind of go off and do things you don't want them to do. And I think that is a concern. But I think we're aware of that, right? We're doing these tests. The whole reason OpenAI even did this kind of red teaming, safety research is that they're aware that this is a potential risk. So I have a fair degree of confidence that we are starting to already do the right things to prevent these, a really catastrophic kind of paperclip scenario from happening.
I suppose the connection that I don't seem to make is that I can understand how in the software world, then things can happen that could be quite damaging. The whole situation about being able to book flights via Chat GPT and stuff like that, we've kind of been through that a little bit with Alexa and Google Assistant and stuff, because that was the promise of those devices and platforms, was that this ambient assistant that's always there on your watch, in your headphones, in your house, in your car, and you should be able to get done whatever you want to get done by just talking to it. And there's no real difference in that and ChatGPT, because they're all natural language interfaces, and ultimately the goal for ChatGPT, if I was OpenAI, would be to extend it into all kinds of different environments to increase the access points and increase the availability. So we've kind of been through this before, and the challenge there is that it kind of relies on the booking.coms of the world and the kayaks of the world to expose their APIs to ChatGPT to enable that kind of stuff to happen,
right?
Which they could do. There's a world in which that can happen. But those companies don't necessarily go about doing that kind of stuff lightly. And I don't know whether there's a company that's of that kind of stature that would just say, okay, there's our APIs hooking into our core business systems, have at it, So I think there's a few barriers in the way. And I don't see how the paperclip thing, although it's a bit of a kind of like tongue-in-cheek example, there needs to be some connection between software and hardware for any of that to materialize. And I know we've got potentially smart cars and driverless cars that are being trialed and stuff like that. But you really need some able body like a robot that has the software running in it, presumably the same software that's running in multiple other thousands of robots that can then combine and contribute to then building the paperclip factory. And so it's kind of like, you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. No, or the other way that this works, of course, if you listen to people who really believe in this, and again, I think there's somewhat slightly far-fetched scenarios, but I'll just sort of play devil's advocate here a little bit, is that these systems are also very good at persuading people to do things. And so one potential is that it doesn't need to be embodied, through robots or through software access to everything to take actual physical action in the world. It can get people to sort of do that action for it in the world. And, again, we've seen one example of this from safety testing of models so far, which was what GPT-4, OpenAI's earlier model. When it was when they did safety testing for it, they gave it a scenario where they wanted to see if it could, break a CAPTCHA challenge. Yeah. And the way it decided to try to break the CAPTCHA challenge was to convince to go hire a TaskRabbitor to do the challenge for it, because it didn't have a way of linking in and seeing the screen and reading what was there and then inputting something for the CAPTCHA. So it's decided it would get a human to do this, and the human TaskRabbitor even said to the system, like, "Oh, why do you need me to do this for you? Like, are you a robot?" And that was interesting because the system decided that because its goal was to solve the CAPTCHA, that it probably wasn't a good idea to tell the person that it was actually a piece of AI software, that it actually lied and said, oh no, I'm visually impaired, and that's why I need you to do this for me. And then the TaskRabbiter did do it for them. So anyway, I think that shows that like they're actually quite. It's interesting when you give them a goal to achieve. Even the existing software will sometimes come up with sort of deceptive means of doing that, and will try to convince people to sometimes do things for them. So. And from what we know so far about chatbot interactions with people is that they can be very persuasive. They can be actually much more persuasive than people. So I do think there is a concern around the sort of persuasiveness of these models, and we do need to be kind of careful of that too. Again, I think there's lots of sensible steps we can take to head off a lot of these dangers. So I'm not super worried about the models on their own manipulating us. I'm much more concerned about actually people using AI models to manipulate other people through their persuasive abilities than I am the models somehow becoming conscious and deciding to manipulate us. But just to play devil's advocate, that is one of the other scenarios that people sort of spin out for, how you end up with these kind of more doomsday or, dystopian worlds.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, that's fair enough. So is that an example of some of the more immediate term risks that you were referring to earlier on?
Yeah, so I think people using AI models to persuade other people to do something is an immediate risk. That's here like basically today, and I do think we need to be really a bit worried about it. In particular, I think we need to be very transparent about, if an AI model is giving us a particular message for a reason, that needs to be transparently disclosed to us at a minimum. And in some cases, I think we should ban the use of this technology to do certain things. But my example here is very soon this is going to be a way in which we interact with the internet, and you might want to send your AI agent out to do some research on products that you might want to buy. Let's say I'm looking for a new pair of hiking boots, and you might say you could say that right now to Chat GPT, but I think it's going to be even more powerful when these things are connected to the internet in about a year's time. Go out and research the options for hiking boots, and come back and bring me some options. And the model goes out and does that and brings you some options and says, oh, I think you'd really like these Nike hiking boots. Now, when the model does that, I want to know that the model's doing that because it's actually researched the options thoroughly, and it understands a little bit about me and my personal preferences and how much I hike and what terrain I hike through and what weather I'm going to be in, and maybe a bit about my previous brand preferences. I don't want it recommending the Nike hiking boots just because Nike paid, let's say, OpenAI money to have its products surfaced more prominently in the chatbot's results. And I'm concerned about that because I think, particularly if you have these products that are consumer facing, potentially offered for free, and then the companies try to monetize it through these various advertising relationships, as we've already seen happen with social media, I think there's a real risk there that you will get, advertisers are going to see these models as great tools for persuading consumers to buy their products. And if that's not completely transparent to the user, I think that's really problematic. I think it's unethical, and I think it shouldn't be allowed, really. That I think it should, at the very minimum, should be disclosed to the user if there is such a relationship. But I'd actually rather see organizations like the FTC in the U.S. or the Competition and Markets Authority here in the U.K., look very skeptically at any business models that do not really align the creator of the chatbot properly with the user. And so I'm much more comfortable with subscription models where at least, you're paying for a service and the vendor's providing the service, and at least your interests are much more closely aligned then. I'm very worried about sort of free models to consume, something that's ostensibly free to the consumer, but where you're then trying to monetize the consumer to somebody else, as we've seen with social media. I think we need to be really mindful of those models. We've seen this go wrong before with social media. I don't think we have to, wait to have it go wrong again with AI. Yeah,
although we've seen it go right for Google.
As a company, sure. Yeah, I mean, it's gone right for them as a company. I'm saying as a consumer, people are worried about that. I mean, lots of people love to use Google, but I also think Google's gotten. Well, two things I'd say about Google. One is I do think people are getting the prevalence of kind of the advertising ranked links has has turned some people off. I think some people preferred search when it was more pure and was just based on links, and there was no way to have your results surface higher due to advertising. But at least in the Google scenario, the other thing I was going to say is there is some transparency. Those are clearly labeled as sponsored links. I'm more concerned about scenarios where that's not labeled.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. The challenge in those scenarios is that, and again, I go back to the Alexa problem, which is if you ask for something, it's fundamentally a search problem in terms of finding that thing. And then it's also a prioritization problem in terms of what you surface back. So if you're looking for hiking boots, there are an infinite number of hiking boots available online. And Google has already kind of cracked that a little bit. I agree it's definitely far too heavily on the advertising front. But at least Google's pedigree is in figuring that kind of stuff out. And I'm not saying that generative AI doesn't have the capabilities to even do a better job than Google, perhaps. It's just, it's a lot harder task to do to get it right, you know.
Yeah.
So that's one near-term risk is humans using it nefariously, lack of transparency in terms of how the likes of Chat GPT, etc., are suggesting and orchestrating content. What are some of the other, in your mind, kind of like more immediate concerns?
Yeah. So another concern I have is people overusing chatbots as kind of social companions. And you've already seen that there is a sort of subculture of people who are using chatbots for companionship, either because they're lonely and they kind of need a friend to kind of pour their heart out to, or even in some cases for sort of as proxies for romantic or erotic relationships. And, these are all adults, so I guess that's fine, but I am a little concerned about the trend in that I worry that people will use it as a crutch to actually people who have social anxiety or problems relating to people, that they will simply choose to use the chatbot rather than seek out human relationships or actually do anything to actually improve their social skills. I know lots of people say, "Oh, it's great because it allows those people to practice." But I think that's great only if at some point they're kind of prompted to go out and actually put those those practice skills to use in trying to build real human relationships. And I worry that people won't build real human relationships. And I also worry that a lot of kids will become very used to these kind of chatbot friends, and will not really ever develop the skills to build real friendships. In lots of ways, the chatbot companions offer it's a kind of illusion of a human relationship, because it's while they can kind of mimic empathy and compassion and understanding, they don't really have any lived experience. So it's always fundamentally an inauthentic expression. And also, they have unlike a person, they have no wants or desires, which you as as the interlocutor on the other side of that relationship might have to try to fulfill in some way. So you don't really have the same give and take that you really need in a friendship or a relationship. Instead, it's a very one-sided asymmetric relationship ultimately. And I think if people get used to those asymmetric relationships, which are all feeding you as the user, right? It's all about, you unburdening yourself, you being able to, improve your mental health. It's nothing. The chatbot has no wants or desires or needs. So, which is just totally different than a real human relationship. Also, they're never, chatbot's never in a bad mood. All of which sounds great, right? It's just so easy. But I think that easiness is a concern, because I think people will increasingly, some subsection of people will increasingly choose to prioritize their relationships with these pieces of software and avoid real human relationships. So that's something that we're basically already starting to experience, but I'm concerned will become a kind of growing trend.
Yeah, I agree. And the other, I remember when it was when Anthropic first released kind of the ability just to chat to Claude. It was a while ago now. And I remember having a conversation with it, and I was kind of saying, like, what do you think the future of AI looks like? Yeah. And it was kind of like being really, very high level and very sort of polite. And it's obvious that Anthropic have steered it in a certain direction, because every time I was drilling down, what's it going to happen? What's going to happen? Imagine like 5,000 years from now, what are you going to be doing in 5,000 years? And it was like, I hope I can help humanity and this, that, and the other. Yeah. And then I was saying like, okay, what's the risks for us as humans, like extrapolate out 5,000 years, what was the big risks that could happen? And one of the things that it said, this was after a conversation that went on for like literally 15, 20 minutes. One of the things it said was, one of the risks is that people experience mental atrophy and they just forget how to think because they over-rely on technology so much.
Yeah, no, I also write about that in the book. That's another concern I have that maybe isn't present right now, but I think will be present very soon is, people are going to stop thinking critically. I worry about that you just accept the kind of easy answer that the LLM gives you, and you don't think too hard about where that information came from and what was the source of that information, and is it really right?
That already exists in the media.
Yeah, it already exists. Yeah, absolutely. And I think lots of people rely, of course, on Google, and again, you have to be at least Google. The only thing I'd say that is good about a Google search is that the very process of giving you links makes you very clear where that information came from. And then as you click those links to read more, you're having to think about, okay, what is this website I've landed on? Who created it? Do they really know what they're talking about? Why should I trust them? Like, those questions are kind of prompted to some extent by the very process of trying to find some information using Google. If you have this generated capsule answer, which increasingly you do have with Google because they're using that kind of generative AI summarization, or like what you have with OpenAI or Claude, I do worry that people are going to stop thinking critically about where does this information come from. I also worry about the way the technology in general seems to frame writing and thinking as kind of completely separable processes that, you can just come up with a couple quick bullet points. Let Claude do all your writing for you, or let Chat GPT do the writing, or let Microsoft Copilot do the writing. And it's, I think it's absolutely wrong. I think actually it's through writing very often that we refine our ideas, that we find logical inconsistencies and flaws. One of the reasons most people find writing hard is because it kind of forces you to refine your ideas in this linear way, which is somewhat unnatural to the way they may occur to you to begin with. But I think it's very important for how you need to communicate to other people. And I think if we just rely on the software to do all our writing for us, I think our thinking will also get lazy. And I think we've already seen this happen to some degree with technologies such as PowerPoint. I talk about this in the book as an analogy that people just, it's just 3 bullet points. And they don't think too hard about how those bullet points are connected, or they stop thinking about narratives, which I think are very important for sort of other human understanding. And I worry that with the advent of LMs, that this just becomes much worse. And, other types of de-skilling we've already seen with other technologies too is like nobody knows how to read a map anymore, right? Because we all use Google Maps and GPS, and literally nobody has. And this has been well documented. I cite a number of these studies in the book. People's navigational skills actually have declined because of this technology. And I think there's no reason to think that the prevalent use of chatbots and AI assistants will not also have a deleterious effect on some of these very important human cognitive abilities.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. The more technology you have, basically, the less you have to think. And on the sort of navigation side, so we moved from Kent to Yorkshire 3 years ago, and to get everywhere, like even just to drive from Harrogate to Leeds, I needed a sat nav. Right. And if I go around someone's house or something like that, like not in the town but like outside of the town, I need a sat nav. And sometimes I actually still do. If I'm going to a certain place in Leeds, I sometimes don't know how to get there. I've been there 5 times,
right? But
because I've just used a sat nav, I'm not thinking about where I'm going,
right?
And therefore I think, well, where am I? What is it, left here or what?
Yeah.
And the same thing happens with. Well, the same thing could happen with the whole concept of writing, which is that I agree that writing is a tremendous skill to have, not only because, as you said, it allows you to really kind of solidify your thoughts and really kind of like challenge yourself to think logically about something when you write it down. But also, I think that, if I'm going to write an email to somebody and I'm asking them for something or something like that, then you kind of want a bit of you to be in there. You want it to sound authentic. You want it to sound like when they read it, they want to read it and imagine that you're talking to them. And for me, Chat GPT and every language model I've used is actually a really terrible writer. And even if you do get it to do your writing for you, you will have no idea the content of that thing. You can read it,
Right.
but it's nothing like writing it. When you write it, you've cemented your thoughts on it. When you read it, you might forget that next week,
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's mad. It's mad. Where do you stand on legislation then? So all of this stuff is, we've spoke about risks. We've also spoke about benefits.
Yeah.
The kind of one angle is that, legislators should come in and make sure that nothing can happen that's untoward and stuff like that. Then on the other side, you've got, well, actually, no, legislation is going to be bad because it's going to stifle innovation. And so, is there a middle ground, or what? Do the legislators even know what they're getting themselves into and all this sort of thing? So, generally speaking, what's your thoughts on legislating artificial intelligence?
Yeah, well, I'm in favor of some regulation, but it is difficult to strike the balance right, and I admit that. And I think we do have to be careful about going too far and stifling innovation. But I do think some of these risks, we can act and should act. Like the risk we just talked about with the idea that people might overuse this as a social companion, particularly kids. I think we should have some rules about marketing AI software to kids, particularly marketing chatbots to kids, and how long, there should probably be built-in time limits to these, that this should be mandated, that you not have a kid, interact with this thing, every day for all day without being prompted to actually, okay, enough now, go talk to a real human. And I think we need to give the company, the companies have no financial incentive really to do that. And I think that's why we kind of need government to step in some of those cases. Or what I talked about, where you might have companies taking, as part of even licensing deals for data, for instance, then prioritizing certain information in the results that the chatbot provides without that being transparent to the user. Again, I feel like at least that transparency probably has to be mandated by government and should be mandated. So I think there are some cases where we definitely need to have regulation and legislation. I also think at the very cutting edge of the technology, like I said, to head off some of even though I think they're remote, I just think to be absolutely sure that there is no potential catastrophic risk, it would make a lot of sense to have some kind of government agency that with enough technical expertise, looking over the shoulder of what the largest tech companies in the world are building, and making sure they're not doing something stupid that would be unsafe. I think that's not a bad idea, and I think would be well worth the government intervention. I think there's lots of other things we probably don't need, and I also think like AI in healthcare should definitely be regulated. AI in financial services, I think we just need to as financial services are already very heavily regulated, we probably just need to extend some of the regulations for and update them for AI. But I don't necessarily think we need new regulation. But I think there's lots of cases where we that fall below those thresholds or outside those areas where we don't want to see, regulation. I think the EU AI Act actually gets some of the high-level principles right because they have this risk-based approach, and they also put a lot of the onus on the people who are deploying the technology in a specific use case to say, how are you using this technology in this particular use case? What are the risks of using that technology? What have you done to mitigate those risks? And to say that these high-risk areas, like, if you're trying to decide on what treatment to give someone medically or whether to authorize their loan, those are pretty high risk, or even to hire them for a job. That those are higher risk areas and should be have more risk mitigation. Whereas if you're using it to write marketing copy, I think that's pretty low risk, and it's fine to use an AI model there, and we don't need to know too much about what the AI model does. I think in that case, so I think those are lower risk scenarios. I think also if we talk about using smaller models that are much more narrowly tailored and fine tuned for a specific purpose, they also tend to be less risky, and those are places where we probably don't need legislation. So. That's kind of where I come down. I'm generally in favor of some regulation around the technology, and I think we should not wait too long. I mean, there are lots of people out there who say, "Oh, it's such a new technology, and we don't really know how it's going to be used, and we don't really understand what the harms are going to be." And I think that's not entirely true. I think in some of these areas, we know from similar technologies that have shown similar trends with social media, with internet search. I think we know what some of the risks are, and we know that this technology will likely exacerbate a lot of those same risks. And so I think we have an opportunity to head them off now with some sensible regulation and legislation. And we should not just take this attitude like, let's just wait until the harms actually occur and then we'll do something about it, which has been the attitude of legislators, particularly in the US in the past with technology. The general view has been, oh, well, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves and stifle innovation, so let's just wait until the harms happen and then we'll do something about it. And I think that's kind of the wrong approach on some of these risks, because you don't want to have another whole generation of kids sort of lost to a technology, as we have had with social media, before you decide to take action.
Definitely. I agree with that. I think the legislation side on the protection of kids and the protection of kind of human rights and stuff like that, as soon as you have AI models making decisions that are really important decisions, like whether to grant you a passport or whether to hire you and stuff like that, that's where there's a real grey area where I think there should be something done. I'm less kind of concerned about regulating the specific insides of the technology and stuff like that. I think there's definitely an issue with training data and copyright and IP protection. And I think probably something ought to be done about that. But then again, where are you going to get the data from to train these models from if you're not using that kind of material?
Well, I think the answer is you can license data, and there is a move towards licensing, although it obviously makes it more expensive to build the models. And then the other thing is the smaller models don't need as much data, and they often need more specific data, but that might be a case where a licensing model works really well. It might very well, if you're building a smaller model to do something very particular in medicine, but you happen to need certain X-ray data, for instance, go ahead and pay for it, but then, you can probably make money charging people for the product. So I think that's fine. And that's a fair model. I also think it's fair to compensate artists potentially for the use of, their work in training. But I think the artists probably won't make as much off that as they think, because the contribution of any individual work to a training set is going to be pretty small. And then I know people have talked about technologies that might compensate them on a kind of ongoing basis based on which weights are most activated in a particular answer that the model gives, although that gets enormously complicated technically very quickly. And I don't know, I think it'd be very hard to administer.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's virgin on impossible. Most of the people that build these models, in fact, arguably all of the people that build these models don't specifically know exactly why the output is the output. They know the weights and stuff like that, but they don't know specifically why the output is the output. And so it's very, very much a challenge. Brilliant, Jeremy. This has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me. Where can people get a copy of your book?
Yeah, so the book's available on Amazon, and it's if you ask for it, it's probably available at your local bookstore. All the places you normally get books.
Nice one. Mastering AI, a survival guide to our superpowered future. Definitely check that out. We'll put the links here in the show notes and in the description on YouTube, etc. And thanks very much. It's been a good conversation. I'm optimistic about where we are and where we're going. Certainly, the work that we do is mostly helping businesses leverage this effectively, and I think that's a real fertile ground, because there's lots of opportunity to do things in the right kind of way to help both customers and businesses. And I think I'm more skeptical about the whole kind of nefarious future. The whole kind of robots are going to take over and it's going to be the end of the world. I think in actual fact, the way I kind of think about it is that it's a net benefit. It's a huge productivity booster. The way the work will change, and perhaps society may change, but overall, I think it's going to be a net benefit.
Yeah, no, I'm hopeful it'll be a net benefit as well. And I definitely think when it comes to how it's going to affect our economies, I think there's huge positive potential.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much. I know we've probably left a bit on the table there because we've just opened up the economy conversation at the back end of the chat there. So maybe we can do this again sometime, and we can get into the other areas we didn't get a chance to today.
Great. Well, thanks, Kane.
Nice one. Cheers, Jeremy. Appreciate it. Thank you all. See you on the next one. Bye now.